It began with a closed-door exchange inside Buckingham Palace, a conversation so tense that even veteran aides refused to speak of it afterward. But the rigid posture of Princess Anne as she exited said more than any statement ever could. Something had shifted, and this time, the tremor ran straight through Zara Tindall. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What made this moment so unsettling was not the raised voices, because there were none but the silence that followed. Those familiar with the palace's inner workings often describe silence as the most dangerous signal of all, a quiet acknowledgement that something irreversible has just taken place. Reports suggest that the meeting brought together not only Anne but a tightly controlled circle of senior advisors and legal minds. Individuals rarely assembled unless the matter at hand carries institutional weight. It was not a casual discussion, not a routine briefing, but something far more calculated, something that demanded precision rather than emotion. What remains particularly striking is how swiftly the palace machinery seemed to shift afterward. Insiders whisper that within hours, communications teams were given strict instructions to withhold comment, an unusual move in an environment where even minor developments are often carefully shaped for public consumption. This was different. This was containment. And when containment becomes the priority, it often signals that the issue is not just personal, it is structural. Various interpretations of the situation describe a breach of internal royal expectations, a phrase deliberately vague yet loaded with implication. Within the monarchy, expectations are rarely written down, but they are deeply understood, passed through generations like an invisible code. To breach them is not merely to make a mistake, it is to challenge the very framework that holds the institution together. Observers who caught a glimpse of Anne in the aftermath noted a transformation that was impossible to ignore. She was not visibly shaken, not outwardly emotional, but resolute in a way that carried its own gravity. Those who have followed her decades of service, over 500 official engagements a year, a lifetime defined by duty, recognized that look. It was the expression of someone who had already made a decision. And when Princess Anne reaches that point, reversal is rarely an option. Media insiders, particularly those with long-standing ties to royal reporting, have since suggested that tensions surrounding Zara had been quietly building for months, perhaps even longer. Subtle shifts in tone, minor inconsistencies in appearances, whispers that never quite reached the surface until now. And then there was the timing. Why now? Why bring such a matter to the forefront at a moment when the monarchy is already navigating delicate transitions and mounting scrutiny? That question lingers unanswered but impossible to ignore, adding another layer of complexity to an already unfolding situation. Because within the House of Windsor, timing is never accidental. Every move, every silence, every carefully controlled narrative carries intention. And as the whispers began to spread beyond palace walls, one thing became increasingly clear. This was not a fleeting controversy, not a moment that would quietly fade into the background. It was something deeper, something rooted in principles that the monarchy guards fiercely, even at the cost of personal relationships. Yet the most chilling realization was not the existence of the issue itself, but the suggestion that it had reached a point where intervention was no longer optional. That whatever had been overlooked, tolerated, or quietly managed before had now crossed a threshold that demanded action. And as those early whispers of a privilege reassessment began to circulate more openly, the narrative shifted from speculation to inevitability. Because when the institution begins to reassess privilege, it is rarely a symbolic gesture, it is a recalibration of boundaries, a reassertion of control. And in that moment, Zara Tindall was no longer just a member of the extended royal family. She had become the center of a decision that would ripple far beyond her own position. But what triggered Anne's decisive stance wasn't sudden, it was the culmination of a growing concern that had finally reached a breaking point. Long before the current storm, the name Zara Tindall carried a quiet but powerful association with royal loyalty. But legacy, within the House of Windsor, is never permanent, it is conditional. And as whispers grew louder, the question became unavoidable. Had Zara crossed an invisible line that even blood could not erase? To understand why this moment feels so charged, so heavy with consequence, one must first understand the delicate position Zara has always occupied. She was never a working royal, never bound by the relentless schedule that defines figures like Princess Anne, yet she existed within the orbit of the crown, benefiting from its proximity while maintaining a degree of independence. It was a balance carefully maintained, quietly understood, and like all balances within the monarchy, it depended not on written rules, but on something far more fragile: trust. That trust is often described by insiders as an unwritten contract, a silent agreement that governs those who stand close to the institution without formally serving it. It allows for freedom, but only within limits. It offers privilege, but only so long as those privileges are not seen to conflict with the values of the crown. For years, Zara navigated this space with apparent ease, embodying a modern extension of royal life that felt both accessible and respectful. But as palace observers have begun to suggest, something in that balance may have shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that sparked immediate headlines, but gradually through small decisions, subtle changes, moments that might have seemed insignificant in isolation, but, when viewed together, began to form a pattern. History offers a quiet warning here, one that those within royal circles understand all too well. Privileges, once granted, can just as easily be withdrawn. Not publicly, not with declarations or spectacle, but through a series of controlled adjustments that redefine a person's place without ever announcing it outright. There have been precedence figures who once moved freely within royal spaces, only to find those doors gradually narrowing, their presence becoming less central, less expected. It is never framed as punishment. It is presented as necessity. And within that framing lies the true power of the institution, its ability to recalibrate without ever appearing to fracture. For Princess Anne, this principle is not theoretical, it is foundational. Her entire life has been shaped by a fierce commitment to discipline, to the idea that the monarchy must be protected not just from external threats, but from internal drift. She has long been regarded as the guardian of standards, the one who ensures that tradition is not diluted in the name of convenience. And when someone like Anne begins to take notice, it is rarely because of a single misstep. It is because a line, once distant, has been approached too closely for comfort. Those watching closely began to notice the signs before any formal action was even whispered. Zara's appearances, once seamlessly integrated into the broader royal rhythm, started to feel slightly out of sync. Invitations that would have once been assumed became less predictable. Interactions that once appeared effortless carried a hint of distance. Nothing overt, nothing that could be definitively pointed to as evidence, but enough to raise questions among those who understand how the monarchy communicates without speaking. Palace insiders, speaking in carefully measured tones, have hinted at inconsistencies in protocol adherence, a phrase that, much like the earlier whispers, reveals just enough to suggest concern without ever fully defining it. And perhaps that is what makes this moment so compelling, so unsettling. Because it is not built on a single event, not driven by a clear and undeniable turning point, but by an accumulation of subtle shifts that have now reached a level where they can no longer be ignored. The weight of legacy, once a shield that allowed Zara to move with a certain freedom, now seems to press against her, demanding accountability rather than offering protection. It is a transformation that feels both inevitable and deeply personal, a reminder that within the House of Windsor, even those who stand just outside its formal structure are never truly beyond its reach. If legacy once shielded Zara, it now seemed to be the very standard against which she was being judged. Reports suggest the turning point came, not with a scandal, but with a decision. A single move, described by insiders as miscalculated, that quietly triggered alarms within palace corridors. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public, but it was enough. What makes this moment so difficult to define is precisely what makes it so powerful. It lived in the gray space between permission and overreach, between independence and expectation. For someone like Zara Tindall, who had long navigated that space with confidence, the shift was almost imperceptible at first. But within the monarchy, perception is everything. And once a line is believed to have been crossed, even subtly, it cannot be unseen. Insiders whisper that concerns began to surface around what some have cautiously described as commercial overreach. The phrase itself is carefully chosen, neither accusatory nor dismissive, but it carries weight. It suggests a growing unease about the intersection between royal association and private enterprise, a boundary that has historically been guarded with quiet intensity. Zara, known for her independent pursuits and professional ventures, had always balanced her identity between royal connection and personal ambition. But as various interpretations of recent developments suggest, that balance may have begun to tilt. Not dramatically, not in a way that invited immediate scrutiny, but enough to raise questions among those tasked with preserving the institution's integrity. The monarchy has faced similar tensions before, moments when the blending of public duty and private gain created friction that could not be ignored. Comparisons, though rarely stated outright, are often implicit in the data, have reportedly been drawn to past controversies involving other members of the royal family instances where the boundaries of acceptable conduct were tested, and the consequences that followed served as quiet but powerful reminders. Those familiar with these precedents understand that the crown does not react impulsively. It observes. It evaluates. And when it acts, it does so with precision. According to sources close to the situation, there were warnings subtle at first, then increasingly direct. Not public statements, not formal reprimands, but private conversations designed to recalibrate, to gently steer the course before it veered too far. And at the center of those efforts was Princess Anne, whose role as a guardian of royal discipline places her in a unique position. Anne is not known for dramatics, she is known for clarity. When she speaks, particularly in private, it is often with the intention of preventing escalation rather than responding to it. Reports suggest that she issued what many now describe as a final, measured caution, a moment that, in hindsight, may have been the last opportunity to restore balance without consequence. But here lies the tension that now defines the narrative. There is a growing sense, whispered but persistent, that Zara may not have fully grasped the seriousness of the situation. That what was intended as a warning may have been perceived as a suggestion, something flexible rather than absolute. And within the rigid framework of royal expectation, that distinction is critical, because the monarchy does not operate on ambiguity. Its strength lies in its clarity, in the understanding that certain lines, once drawn, are not meant to be tested. As the pieces of this unfolding situation begin to align, the earlier whispers of inconsistency take on a new meaning. What once seemed like minor deviations now appear as part of a broader pattern, one that has drawn the attention of those who rarely intervene without cause. And the silence that followed Anne's meeting, the controlled messaging, the subtle shifts in tone, all of it begins to point toward a single conclusion, that the matter has moved beyond quiet correction and into the realm of decisive action. And when that warning went unheeded, the response from the palace would be swift and unmistakably firm. Princess Anne does not react, she executes. And when the moment came, insiders describe her response as nothing short of surgical. Within days, a quiet but powerful mechanism was set into motion, one designed not to punish, but to restore order. There were no dramatic announcements, no public declarations to mark the shift, yet those familiar with the inner workings of the monarchy understood immediately that something decisive had begun. This was not improvisation, this was structure, and at the center of it stood Princess Anne, a figure whose approach to crisis has always been defined by precision rather than emotion, by control rather than spectacle. What followed, according to palace administrative streams and carefully guarded whispers, was the activation of what insiders now refer to as an internal privilege review. The phrase itself carries a quiet authority, suggesting a process that is both methodical and deeply consequential. It is not a punishment in the traditional sense. It is something far more complex, a recalibration of position, a reassessment of access, a subtle but unmistakable redefining of where an individual stands within the royal structure. And for Zara Tindall, this process marked a turning point that could not easily be reversed. The changes, as they began to unfold, were not announced, they were felt. Invitations that once arrived as a matter of course became uncertain. Access to certain spaces, both physical and symbolic, appeared to narrow. Representation, once informal but meaningful, began to shift in ways that were difficult to ignore. Each adjustment, taken on its own, might have seemed minor. But together, they formed a pattern, one that signaled a deliberate effort to redraw boundaries that had, until recently, remained fluid. This is how the monarchy enforces its standards, not through confrontation, but through controlled withdrawal. Behind these adjustments stood the quiet machinery of palace legal teams, individuals whose role is rarely visible, but whose influence is deeply embedded in every decision of consequence. Reports suggest that their involvement was not incidental but central, ensuring that each measure taken was not only appropriate but defensible within the framework of royal protocol. This is where Anne's reputation for bureaucratic precision becomes most evident. She does not act on impulse. She builds a case. She aligns every step with precedent, with policy, with the unspoken rules that govern the institution. And once that structure is in place, the execution becomes almost inevitable. What makes this moment particularly striking is the sense of alignment that appears to have formed around her. Various interpretations of the situation suggest that Anne's approach did not exist in isolation, but was supported quietly, strategically by other senior figures within the royal family. There is a growing perception that a broader consensus has emerged, one that favors stricter boundaries and a more disciplined approach to managing the roles of extended family members. It is not a rebellion. It is not a division. It is a consolidation, a recognition that the institution must adapt in order to preserve itself. And from this alignment, something new seems to be taking shape, what some insiders have begun to describe as an emerging enforcement doctrine. Not a formal policy, not a written decree, but a shared understanding that the standards governing royal association are no longer as flexible as they once appeared. It is a shift that feels both subtle and profound, one that reflects a deeper transformation within the monarchy itself. Because when the rules begin to tighten, it is rarely about a single individual. It is about setting a precedent, about sending a message that extends far beyond the immediate situation. The implications of this doctrine are still unfolding, still being interpreted, but one thing is becoming increasingly clear. This is not a temporary adjustment. It is a recalibration of expectations, a reassertion of control that will shape the behavior of those within the royal orbit for years to come. And as the effects of Anne's actions continue to ripple outward, the question is no longer whether the institution will hold its ground, but how far it is willing to go to protect it. But Anne's actions did not occur in isolation. They were backed by a broader shift within the royal hierarchy. While Anne led the charge, another figure watched closely from within the palace's inner circle. Queen Camilla, long perceived as a master of quiet influence, did not oppose the move. In fact, reports suggest she may have subtly reinforced it. What makes this alignment so compelling is not its visibility, but its discretion. Camilla has never been a figure of overt confrontation. Her influence has always operated in the margins, in the careful calibration of tone, in the quiet shaping of consensus. And in moments like this, where the balance of tradition and adaptation hangs delicately in the air, that kind of influence becomes not just relevant but decisive. Her position within the royal household is uniquely complex. She is both an insider and, in many ways, a figure who had to earn her place through years of scrutiny and gradual acceptance. That journey has, according to those familiar with palace dynamics, given her a deep understanding of how fragile public perception can be. She knows what it means to be questioned, to be weighed against the expectations of the crown. And perhaps because of that, she is acutely aware of the importance of maintaining clear boundaries not just for herself, but for anyone connected to the institution. Various interpretations of her role in this situation suggest that she viewed the unfolding tension not as a personal matter, but as a test of the monarchy's ability to enforce its own standards. Insiders claim that Camilla's support for maintaining strict boundaries was not expressed through declarations, but through alignment. A quiet agreement with the direction Anne had chosen, a recognition that the situation required firmness rather than flexibility. This is where the political nature of the monarchy reveals itself most clearly, not in public ceremonies or official statements, but in the internal negotiations that determine how challenges are handled. And in this case, the negotiation appears to have been resolved not through debate, but through convergence. Two influential figures, each with their own perspective, arriving at the same conclusion, that the integrity of the institution must come first. The importance of presenting a unified royal front cannot be overstated. In an era where every gesture is analyzed, every silence interpreted, any sign of division carries risks that extend far beyond the immediate issue. Camilla, with her experience navigating public and private expectations, is said to have understood this instinctively. To oppose Anne's approach would have introduced uncertainty, a fracture in the narrative that could have amplified speculation. To support it, even quietly, was to reinforce stability, to signal that the monarchy remains cohesive, even in moments of internal tension. There is also, according to those who follow these dynamics closely, a deeper concern at play, one that goes beyond the specifics of Zara's situation. It is the question of precedent, because within the monarchy, every decision sets a standard, every action becomes a reference point for the future. If boundaries are seen to be flexible, they invite further testing. If they are enforced, they establish clarity. Camilla's apparent alignment with Anne suggests an awareness of this principle, a recognition that the long-term health of the institution depends on its willingness to define and defend its limits. What is emerging from this moment is not just a response to a single situation, but a broader shift in how the royal family approaches its internal dynamics. The growing alignment between Anne and Camilla, two figures who represent different facets of the monarchy, signals a convergence of priorities. Tradition and adaptation, discipline and diplomacy, coming together to form a more cohesive strategy. It is a development that carries significant implications, not just for Zara, but for anyone who exists within the extended royal orbit. And as this alignment solidifies, the sense of inevitability becomes impossible to ignore. Because when figures of such influence move in the same direction, the outcome is rarely uncertain. The mechanisms set in motion by Anne gain momentum, reinforced by Camilla's quiet support, shaping a response that feels both calculated and unavoidable. What began as whispers, as subtle shifts and unspoken concerns, is now evolving into something far more definitive. With key figures aligned, the decision was no longer a possibility, it was an inevitability. The term royal privileges is rarely defined, but when they begin to disappear, their absence becomes unmistakable. Invitations fade, access narrows, visibility shifts, and for Zara Tindall, the changes were subtle but deeply significant. What makes this transformation so difficult to grasp from the outside is that royal privilege is not a single, tangible asset. It is a network of access points, a series of unspoken allowances that shape how closely one moves to the center of the institution. It is the difference between being present and being essential, between attending and belonging. And when that network begins to contract, the effect is not immediate, it unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, until the cumulative weight becomes impossible to ignore. At its core, royal privilege is less about titles and more about proximity. It determines who stands close during key moments, who is invited into spaces where decisions are shaped, who is seen as part of the living narrative of the crown. Zara, long positioned within that extended circle, benefited from a form of informal inclusion that allowed her to move with a degree of freedom while still maintaining a visible connection to the monarchy. But as insiders suggest, that connection has begun to recalibrate. Invitations that once felt automatic have reportedly become selective, their absence speaking louder than their presence ever did. This is where the changes become most apparent, not through announcements, but through patterns. A seat placed slightly further away, an appearance that feels less central, a role that shifts from participant to observer. These are the signals the monarchy uses when it chooses to adjust without confronting, to redefine without declaring. And those who understand the language of these signals recognize their significance immediately. They are not accidental. They are intentional, precise, and deeply symbolic. There is also the matter of representation, a concept that carries particular weight within royal circles. Even for those who are not formally designated as working royals, there exists an expectation of alignment and understanding that their public presence reflects, in some capacity, the values of the crown. Reports suggest that Zara's role in this informal representation has been quietly reduced, her association with certain aspects of royal life becoming less emphasized. It is not a removal, not a complete withdrawal, but a recalibration that subtly alters how she is perceived both within and beyond the institution. As these shifts began to take shape, the media, particularly those attuned to the nuances of royal dynamics, started to take notice, not in headlines or declarations, but in questions, in observations that pointed to changes without fully explaining them. This is how such transitions often enter the public consciousness, not as confirmed narratives, but as emerging patterns that invite interpretation. And once those patterns are recognized, they become difficult to dismiss. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of this moment is the distinction it highlights between formal titles and functional influence. Zara's status, in an official sense, remains unchanged. She is still who she has always been within the structure of the royal family. But influence, unlike title, is fluid. It expands and contracts based on trust, alignment, and perception. And what appears to be unfolding now is a contraction and narrowing of influence that, while not publicly acknowledged, carries profound implications. Because within the monarchy, influence is everything. It shapes opportunities, defines relevance, and determines how one is positioned within the broader narrative of the crown. To lose it, even partially, is to experience a shift that goes far beyond logistics. It is to feel the distance grow, the connection weaken, the role transform in ways that cannot be easily reversed. Yet the consequences extended beyond logistics, they touch something far more personal. Behind the protocol and policy lies a family, and moments like these leave marks that no official statement can erase. For Zara Tindall, the shift was not just institutional. It was deeply personal. Because beyond the carefully managed narratives and the quiet recalibrations of access, there exists a reality that cannot be softened by procedure, the reality of distance forming where closeness once defined everything. Those who have long observed the royal family often speak of its dual nature, an institution bound by duty and a family bound by history. When those two forces collide, the result is rarely simple. And for Zara, this moment appears to sit directly at that intersection. Her bond with Princess Anne has always been one of the most grounded relationships within the royal narrative. Not performative, not shaped for public consumption, but built on years of shared understanding, mutual respect, and a kind of unspoken loyalty that does not require explanation. Anne, known for her unwavering commitment to duty, has often been seen as both a guiding force and a stabilizing presence in Zara's life, and it is precisely this closeness that makes the current situation so emotionally charged. Because when discipline comes from a distance, it can be rationalized. But when it comes from someone who has always stood close, it carries a different weight entirely. There is a growing sense, reflected in quiet observations and careful interpretations, that the emotional impact of this distancing is being felt on both sides. Not in public gestures or visible conflict, but in the subtle shifts that occur when familiarity is replaced by formality. The monarchy, for all its structure, does not eliminate emotion, it simply contains it. And within that containment, moments like these can become profoundly isolating. Zara, once moving with ease within the royal circle, now appears to be navigating a space that feels less certain, less defined, and perhaps more fragile than ever before. Publicly, the narrative remains controlled, measured, almost neutral. Appearances continue. Interactions are maintained. But those who look closely suggest that there is a difference between presence and connection, between being there and truly belonging. This is where the contrast between public perception and private reality becomes most apparent. Media speculation, as it often does, attempts to fill the silence with interpretations, some of it grounded, some of it exaggerated. Yet behind those headlines lies a far more nuanced reality, one that cannot be easily captured or fully understood from the outside. Amid this shifting landscape, one constant appears to remain: Mike Tindall. Known for his steady presence and grounded perspective, Mike has often been described as a source of support, someone who exists just outside the formal constraints of royal life while still understanding its complexities. His role in this moment, though not publicly defined, is quietly significant, because in times of uncertainty, often those closest, those unaffected by institutional pressures, who provide the clarity and stability needed to navigate the emotional weight of change. And yet, even with that support, the balance between duty and personal relationships becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. The monarchy demands adherence, consistency, alignment. Family, on the other hand, demands understanding, forgiveness, connection. When those demands begin to pull in different directions, the strain is inevitable. And for Zara, this moment seems to embody that tension in its most raw and unfiltered form. What makes this situation so compelling is not just the decisions being made, but the human cost that accompanies them. Because every adjustment, every recalibration, carries with it an emotional echo, one that lingers long after the official narrative has moved on. And as the distance between roles and relationships continues to evolve, the question is no longer just about position within the monarchy, but about the nature of belonging itself. And as the dust settled, one question remained: what does this mean for the future? In the modern monarchy, survival depends not on tradition alone, but on discipline. And this moment, quiet as it was, may mark a turning point in how the royal family defines its boundaries moving forward. What began as whispers, as subtle recalibrations and carefully managed silence, now reveals itself as something far more significant, a deliberate tightening of expectations, a reaffirmation that proximity to the crown is not a passive inheritance but an active responsibility. For figures like Zara Tindall, this shift carries a message that extends beyond the present moment, reshaping what it means to exist within the royal orbit. Because the monarchy, as it evolves, is no longer willing to rely solely on tradition as its guiding force. It demands clarity. It demands consistency. And above all, it demands discipline. There is a growing recognition within royal circles that the line between public accountability and private privilege can no longer remain blurred. The world watching the monarchy has changed, and with it, the expectations placed upon those connected to it. Informal roles, once tolerated with flexibility, are now being examined with greater scrutiny. The idea that one can benefit from association without fully aligning with its standards is being quietly but firmly challenged. And in this recalibration, the institution is sending a clear signal that every connection to the crown, no matter how distant, carries weight, and that weight must be carried with care. At the center of this transformation stands Princess Anne, whose influence in this moment feels both immediate and enduring. Her actions are not simply a response to a single situation, they are part of a broader effort to reinforce the principles that have defined her entire life: duty, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to the integrity of the monarchy. These are not abstract ideals for Anne, they are operational standards. And through what insiders have described as a precise and controlled intervention, she has once again positioned herself as the guardian of those standards, ensuring that they are not diluted by convenience or compromised by ambiguity. But the implications of this moment reach far beyond Zara, far beyond any individual. They extend into the future of the monarchy itself, shaping how the next generation will understand their roles and responsibilities. Because every action taken now becomes a reference point later. Every boundary enforced becomes a precedent. And for younger members of the royal family, watching closely from within that same orbit, the message is unmistakable: that the privileges associated with their position are not guaranteed, they are conditional. They are earned through alignment, through adherence, through a willingness to place the institution above personal preference. This is where the balance between modernization and tradition becomes most critical. The monarchy cannot remain static, it must adapt to remain relevant. But adaptation does not mean abandoning its core principles. It means reinforcing them in ways that resonate with a changing world. And what we are witnessing now is a recalibration of that balance, a moment where the institution is redefining how it upholds its values in an era that demands greater transparency and accountability. As the dust continues to settle, what remains is not just the memory of a decision, but the imprint of its consequences. Relationships may adjust. Roles may evolve, but the underlying message endures, shaping the narrative that will carry forward long after this moment has passed. Because within the monarchy, every action is part of a larger story, a story of survival, of adaptation, of the constant tension between personal identity and institutional duty. And in that story, moments like these are not anomalies. They are milestones. They mark the points where the monarchy reasserts itself, where it draws its lines more clearly, where it reminds those within its reach that belonging is not unconditional. It is a privilege that must be maintained, protected, and, when necessary, redefined. Because within the House of Windsor, privilege is never permanent, it is earned, protected, and, when necessary, taken away. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.